My name is Harper Mitchell, and I'm 17 years old. Right now, I'm standing in our pristine living room, while my mother and stepfather deliver an ultimatum that makes my blood run cold. They're telling me I cannot return to school until I apologize to Ethan, my stepbrother, their precious golden boy. My mother's eyes are filled with disappointment, and Richard's face is stone cold with judgment. They actually believe I attacked Ethan at the country club last week. They think I'm the problem, the troubled teen who needs to be controlled. What they don't know is that Ethan has been systematically destroying my life for 2 years, and this suspension is his masterstroke. But they had no idea what I was about to do next. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments below. If you've ever felt misunderstood by your own family, hit that like button, and don't forget to subscribe, because what happens next will show you exactly how I turn the tables on everyone who tried to break me. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single moment of this. 2 years ago, my life changed completely when my mom married Richard Mitchell. I remember feeling this surge of hope, this belief that maybe, finally, we'd have a real family. My biological father had abandoned us when I was 8 years old, leaving my mom Catherine to raise me alone while working double shifts as a nurse. When Richard came into our lives with his wealth, his big house in the suburbs, and his promises of stability, my mom transformed into someone I barely recognized. She was so desperate to make this marriage work, so determined to prove she could be the perfect wife for a successful businessman. Richard owned a commercial real estate company, drove luxury cars, and belonged to the most exclusive country club in town. To my mom, he represented everything she'd been denied her whole life. She would have done anything to keep him happy, and that included prioritizing his needs over mine from day one. Then there was Ethan Mitchell, Richard's son from his first marriage. At 19, Ethan was everything parents dreamed their children would be. Handsome with his perfectly styled dark hair and athletic build, charming enough to make adults melt with a single smile, and Yale-bound with a full acceptance letter already secured. Everyone loved Ethan. Teachers praised him, neighbors adored him, and Richard spoke about his son with a pride that bordered on worship. In Richard's eyes, Ethan could do absolutely no wrong. Every achievement was celebrated like a national holiday, every opinion treated as gospel truth. I tried to be happy for this new family dynamic. I really did. During those first few months, I convinced myself that having an older stepbrother might be nice, that Richard's obvious wealth would give my mom the security she deserved, that we could all be happy together in that beautiful 5-bedroom house, with the manicured lawn and the 3-car garage. But warning signs appeared almost immediately, subtle things I tried to ignore because I wanted so desperately to believe in this new family. Ethan's behavior around me felt wrong from the start. He'd stand too close when we talked, his eyes lingering on my body in ways that made my skin crawl. When my mom and Richard were in another room, he'd make comments about how I was developing, how pretty I looked in certain outfits, how lucky he was to have such an attractive stepsister. He'd find excuses to touch my shoulder, my arm, my lower back. Once, he walked into my bedroom while I was changing, claiming he didn't know I was in there even though I'd locked the door and he somehow had a key. His apologies always came with that perfect smile, that innocent act that made me question whether I was overreacting. When I tried to tell my mom about feeling uncomfortable, she dismissed my concerns immediately. She told me I was being silly, that Ethan was just being friendly, that I needed to make more effort to accept my new family. That first, small betrayal stung more than I expected. My own mother had chosen to believe in Ethan's innocence rather than trust my discomfort. As months passed, my isolation grew deeper. The friends I'd had before the marriage started drifting away. Our new house was in a different school district, farther from my old neighborhood. My mom was always busy planning dinners with Richard's colleagues or attending events at the country club. I spent more and more time alone in my room, trying to stay out of Ethan's way, trying to convince myself that everything was fine. Meanwhile, the Mitchell family presented a perfect facade to the world. We attended charity galas where Richard gave speeches about family values. We posed for photos at the country club's annual fundraiser. We sat through family dinners where everyone smiled and made polite conversation while I felt like I was drowning. Richard's obsession with maintaining appearances meant that any deviation from perfection was treated as a personal attack. My mom bought into this completely, transforming from the warm, attentive mother I'd known into someone who cared more about impressing her new husband than protecting her daughter. I was losing her bit by bit, watching her prioritize Richard and Ethan over everything Wed once shared. The unease in my gut kept growing, whispering that something terrible was coming, but I had no idea just how calculated and cruel Ethan's plans would become. 6 months into the marriage, I started keeping a private diary. I needed somewhere to process what was happening, to document the strange encounters with Ethan, to voice the concerns I couldn't share with anyone else. I wrote about how Ethan's behavior made me uncomfortable, about the comments he made when no one else could hear, about my suspicions that his perfect golden boy image was a carefully constructed lie. I kept that diary locked in my desk drawer, hidden under old-school papers, convinced it was safe. That diary was my only confidential space, the one place where I could be completely honest about my fear and confusion. I never imagined it would become a weapon used against me. One afternoon, I came home from school to find my room slightly disheveled. Nothing major, just small things out of place that made my instincts scream. I checked my desk drawer immediately. The lock had been picked, and my diary was gone. Panic flooded through me as I tore apart my room looking for it, but I knew the truth. Someone had taken it, and I had a terrible suspicion about who. When I confronted my mom, she seemed genuinely confused, promising to help me look for it. Richard barely glanced up from his laptop when I mentioned it. Ethan, who was home from Yale for the weekend, expressed exaggerated concern and offered to help search. I watched his face carefully for any sign of guilt, but he was too good at lying. 2 days later, Richard announced we'd be having a family therapy session. Had been suggesting this for weeks, claiming it would help us bond as a blended family. I'd resisted before, but my mom convinced me to give it a chance, so we drove to Dr. Sullivan's office, a prestigious therapist Richard's company insurance covered, and settled into the comfortable chairs in her warmly decorated office. Everything seemed normal for the first 20 minutes. Dr. Sullivan asked basic questions about how we were adjusting, how communication flowed in our household. Then Ethan pulled my diary from his backpack. The room tilted. He held it up with an expression of deep concern, explaining that Head found it in the family room and felt compelled to read it because he was worried about me. He claimed the contents disturbed him so much that he had to share them with the family and our therapist. My protests were drowned out as Ethan began reading excerpts aloud. But these weren't just excerpts. They were carefully selected passages, taken completely out of context, twisted to make me sound paranoid and unstable. My private thoughts about feeling uncomfortable around Ethan were presented as evidence of jealousy and resentment. My concerns about his behavior were framed as delusional accusations from a troubled teen who couldn't accept her new family. Ethan read them in a voice dripping with fake worry, occasionally pausing to wipe his eyes as if my words had hurt him deeply. He was giving the performance of his lifetime, and everyone in that room was buying it completely. Dr. Sullivan listened with increasing concern, her professional expression shifting to judgment as Ethan continued reading. When he finally finished, she turned to me and gently suggested that I might be experiencing adjustment disorder, that my resistance to the new family structure was manifesting as these paranoid thoughts. She used words like displacement and projection, clinical terms that made me sound mentally ill. My mother sat beside Richard with tears streaming down her face, mortified that her daughter had written such terrible things about her new family. Richard's fury was cold and controlled, the kind of anger that felt more dangerous than yelling. He stated flatly that my behavior was unacceptable, that these lies about Ethan were poisonous to the family unit, that I needed serious help. When I tried to defend myself, tried to explain that Ethan was twisting everything, my words came out desperate and frantic. No one believed me. How could they, when Ethan sat there looking hurt and concerned, when my own diary apparently proved I was unstable? The punishment was swift and severe. I was grounded for 1 entire month with no phone, no computer, no contact with friends. I was required to attend therapy twice a week with Dr. Sullivan to work through my adjustment issues and jealousy. Richard made it clear that any future accusations against Ethan would result in even harsher consequences. My mom hugged Ethan in the parking lot after the session, apologizing for my behavior, promising him that they'd get me help. I stood apart from them, feeling like I'd been pushed off a cliff. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd experienced. My own mother had chosen Ethan's manipulated version of events over her daughter's truth. That night, as I lay in my room under house arrest, Ethan appeared in my doorway. He leaned against the frame with a smile that held no warmth and whispered just loud enough for me to hear. "You can't win against me, Harper. No one will ever believe you over me." Then he was gone, leaving me alone with the devastating realization that this hadn't been a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was calculated. This was planned. Ethan was systematically destroying me, and I had just learned that no one in my family would protect me from him. 3 months after the diary incident, I threw myself into academics with desperate intensity. If I couldn't have a functional family, if I couldn't trust my own mother, then I'd focus on building a future that would let me escape. I maintained a perfect 4.0 grade point average, excelled in advanced placement classes, and began researching college scholarship opportunities. Education became my lifeline, the one thing I believed Ethan couldn't touch. I spent hours in the library after school, joined the debate team, volunteered for extra credit projects. My teachers praised my dedication. My school counselor, Mrs. Patterson, called me a model student with a bright future ahead. For a brief moment, I felt like maybe I could survive this nightmare household if I just kept my head down and focused on getting into a good college far away from the Mitchell family. Ethan came home from Yale frequently, always with some excuse about wanting to spend time with family or help around the house. Richard beamed with pride every time his son walked through the door. My mom would cook elaborate meals and we'd sit through dinners where Ethan charmed everyone with stories about his college experiences. But I noticed things others didn't. I saw how Ethan watched me, how he'd smirk when my mom wasn't looking, how he'd find ways to be alone with me for just a moment, to whisper something cruel or threatening. The sabotage began so subtly that at first I thought I was losing my mind. Homework assignments E'd completed and placed in my backpack would disappear overnight. E'd arrive at school the next morning, reach into my bag, and find them simply gone. Teachers who'd praised me started expressing disappointment when I showed up without work. I tried explaining that I'd completed everything, but without proof, I just looked like I was making excuses. Then more serious problems emerged. Important college application deadlines that I'd carefully noted in my planner somehow got missed. I could have sworn the early decision deadline for my dream school was November 15th, but when I went to submit my application that day, the website showed the deadline had been November 1st. I'd missed it by 2 weeks. My laptop crashed catastrophically the night before my college essays were due, wiping out months of careful work. The computer repair shop couldn't recover anything. Access codes to my school portal kept changing mysteriously, locking me out during critical grade posting periods. I'd have to wait days for administrators to reset my credentials, by which time I'd missed important announcements about makeup work and extra credit opportunities. My carefully maintained 4.0 average started slipping. Teachers who had written glowing recommendation letters started qualifying their praise with concerns about my recent decline in responsibility. The school counselor, Mrs. Patterson, called my mother to express worry about my sudden academic deterioration. This triggered a family meeting where I tried desperately to explain that something weird was happening, that my work kept disappearing, that someone was sabotaging me. But Ethan was ready with his next performance. He suggested gently, with fake concern dripping from every word, that maybe I was under too much pressure. He wondered aloud if perhaps I'd gotten involved with drugs or was struggling with mental health issues beyond what therapy was addressing. He pointed out that sudden academic decline was often a warning sign of substance abuse. Richard latched onto this theory immediately. Within a week, I was subjected to random drug tests, my phone was monitored constantly, and my independence was stripped away piece by piece. My mother cried about where they'd gone wrong with me, asked repeatedly how I could throw away my future like this, begged me to just tell her the truth about what I was really doing instead of making up stories about sabotage. The cruelest blow came when Richard canceled my SAT prep course. He stated coldly that until I proved I was serious about my education by consistently turning in assignments and maintaining my grades, he wouldn't waste money on test preparation. I felt my college dreams crumbling around me. Every scholarship I'd researched required high test scores and strong grades. I was watching my escape route disappear. That's when I started investigating more carefully. I noticed that Ethan had been home during several weekends when my homework disappeared. I realized Head borrowed my house keys once, claiming he needed to grab something from his old room, and had them long enough to make copies. I found evidence that Head somehow gotten my laptop password from watching me type. When I tried confronting him, I made sure to do it when my mom and Richard were present. I laid out my suspicions as calmly as I could. Ethan's response was perfect. He looked hurt and confused, asked why I kept attacking him, reminded everyone that I'd been caught lying in my diary. Richard exploded at me for making false accusations again. I was labeled as a troubled teen who couldn't take responsibility for her own failures, who blamed others for her problems, who needed even more intensive therapy. The truth didn't matter. Evidence didn't matter. All that mattered was that Ethan's performance was more believable than my reality, and I was rapidly losing any credibility I'd once had. 4 months later, as my senior year began, I still had 2 precious things left in my life. My best friend, Brianna Coleman, had stood by me since middle school, refusing to believe the rumors about my supposed mental breakdown. She'd known me too long to buy into the troubled teen narrative. And I had Tyler Brooks, my boyfriend of 8 months, who was kind and supportive and planning a future where we'd both attend state college together. These relationships were my lifeline. The only proof that I wasn't the crazy person my family believed me to be. Brianna understood when I canceled plans because I was grounded. Tyler drove me to therapy appointments and waited in the parking lot because it made me feel less alone. As long as I had them, I could survive anything the Mitchell family threw at me. Ethan came home for fall break during my first month of senior year. Richard threw a family barbecue to celebrate, inviting neighbors and colleagues. Tyler was invited too, since my mom still maintained the appearance of supporting my relationship. I watched with growing dread as Ethan made a point of befriending Tyler, talking about sports and college life, doing the whole big brother routine. They exchanged phone numbers. Ethan suggested they grab coffee sometime to talk about the college experience, since Tyler was applying to universities. Tyler seemed flattered by the attention from this successful Yale student. I wanted to warn him, to explain that Ethan was never kind without ulterior motives, but how could I without sounding paranoid? The version of me that existed in my family's narrative was already unstable. I couldn't afford to seem controlling over my boyfriend's friendships too. The destruction unfolded over the next 3 weeks with surgical precision. It started with photos appearing on an anonymous social media account. The images showed me in compromising positions with guys I'd never met, at parties I'd never attended, doing things I'd never done. The Photoshop work was sophisticated enough that most people couldn't tell they were fake. Someone had taken legitimate photos of me from my social media and digitally inserted me into scenes of wild behavior. Suddenly, rumors exploded through my school. Harper Mitchell was cheating on Tyler. Harper Mitchell got drunk at college parties. Harper Mitchell had a secret life her family didn't know about. The whispers followed me through hallways. Former friends avoided eye contact. People I barely knew felt entitled to confront me about my supposed behavior. Tyler saw the photos when someone sent them to him directly. He came to my house after school, his face a mixture of hurt and confusion, and showed me the images on his phone. I stared at them in horror, trying to explain that they weren't real, that someone had manipulated them. But my explanation sounded exactly like what a cheater would say when caught. Tyler wanted to believe me. I could see the conflict in his eyes. But then I made the fatal mistake of suggesting who might be responsible. When I told Tyler that I thought Ethan had created these photos, that my stepbrother was systematically destroying my life, I watched doubt cloud his expression. "Why would your own brother do that, Harper?" The question hung between us. How could I explain the depth of Ethan's manipulation without sounding completely insane? All my previous accusations against Ethan had been dismissed as lies or delusions. Now I was asking Tyler to believe in an elaborate conspiracy theory while photo evidence of my supposed betrayal existed on multiple platforms. Then Brianna turned against me. Ethan had approached her privately, shown her manufactured text message conversations where I allegedly talked about Brianna behind her back. The messages were cruel and crude, making fun of Brianna's appearance, her family's financial struggles, her insecurities. They looked completely real, pulled from a backup of my confiscated phone that Ethan had somehow accessed. When Brianna confronted me at school, tears streaming down her face, I didn't even know what she was talking about at first. She shoved her phone in my face, showing me horrible things I would never say about my best friend. My denials meant nothing. The messages existed. They had timestamps and read receipts. Brianna told me Shed wasted years on a friendship with someone who secretly despised her. She blocked me on every platform, told our mutual friends to choose sides, and ensured my complete social isolation within days. Tyler broke up with me via text message. The message was short and painful. I can't trust you anymore. I don't know what's real with you. I think you need help. Just like that, the relationship that had sustained me was over. I was utterly alone at school. Study groups excluded me. Partner projects left me working solo. Lunch periods were spent hiding in the library because I had no one to sit with. My reputation was demolished. Teachers looked at me with disappointment. The school administration had heard rumors. Even people who'd never spoken to me before felt entitled to judge me based on photos and gossip. When I tried explaining to my family what had happened, Richard erupted in fury about how I'd embarrassed the Mitchell name. My mom asked through tears why I couldn't just behave normally, why I had to create drama everywhere I went. She genuinely believed I'd destroyed my own relationships through bad choices. Ethan played his role perfectly, comforting my sobbing mother, putting a sympathetic hand on Richard's shoulder, expressing sad concern about his troubled stepsister who kept making such poor decisions. My punishment escalated again. All social media accounts were confiscated and deleted. My weekend curfew became 6 p.m., eliminating any possibility of rebuilding friendships, even if anyone had wanted to spend time with me. I was trapped in that house with the people who refused to see the truth, isolated from any external support, watching Ethan's plan unfold with horrifying precision. Had taken everything: my reputation, my friends, my relationship, my credibility. And the worst part was how everyone believed I'd done it to myself, that this was all the natural consequence of my troubled behavior. No one questioned why these disasters kept happening. No one noticed that Ethan was always present when my life fell apart. They just saw a difficult teen spiraling downward and a concerned stepbrother trying to help. 2 months before the incident that would eventually land me under house arrest, I turned 18 years old. The day should have been a milestone, a celebration of becoming an adult. Instead, it became another nightmare. I'd known since I was 13 that I had a trust fund from my biological father's death. Had been killed in a construction accident when I was 8, and the wrongful death settlement had been placed in trust for me, accessible when I reached legal adulthood. $50,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for college tuition at a state school, enough for an apartment deposit, enough to escape. I'd spent years planning how that money would buy my freedom. It was the light at the end of the tunnel, the proof that eventually I could leave the Mitchell house and build a life where Ethan couldn't reach me. The morning of my 18th birthday, I went to the bank with my identification and the trust fund documents ID kept hidden. The bank manager reviewed my paperwork, typed information into her computer, and then delivered news that stopped my heart. The trust fund was empty, completely drained. 6 months earlier, there had been a legal transfer of all funds to Catherine Mitchell, my mother. The manager showed me the documentation, explaining that, as my legal guardian, my mother had authorization to access the account for my benefit until I reached 18. Technically, the transfer had occurred while I was still 17, which made it legal even if it felt morally wrong. I stared at the bank statement showing a balance of $0.43, my entire future reduced to pocket change. I drove home in a daze, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I confronted my mother that evening, Richard was present, and Ethan had conveniently arrived for the weekend. I asked, as calmly as I could manage, where my trust fund money had gone. My mom didn't even have the grace to look ashamed. She explained matter-of-factly that the money was compensation for all the years Shed raised me alone, for the sacrifices Shed made, for the financial strain of single parenthood. She said it like it was obvious, like, of course she deserved that money more than I did. "That money was meant for your father's daughter," I said quietly. "I am your father's daughter." Catherine's face hardened. She told me I was being selfish, that I didn't understand how hard Shed worked, how much Shed given up. $50,000 barely covered what Shed spent on me over the years. Richard backed her up completely, his voice cold and rational. He pointed out that my mother had legal right to that money, that it had been accessed appropriately. He suggested that perhaps, if I'd been more grateful, more respectful, less troublesome, they might have considered saving some of it for my college education. But given my recent behavior, my declining grades, my destroyed social relationships, did I really think I deserved that money? Ethan added his contribution, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. He noted that I'd probably just waste the money anyway given my current trajectory. Maybe it was better that my mom had secured it for practical family needs. I asked what family needs had required $50,000. The question hung in the air. Richard's jaw tightened. Catherine looked away. Neither of them answered. I spent the next week researching my options. I found a pro bono lawyer through a legal aid clinic who reviewed my case. She explained gently that while the situation felt deeply unfair, it was technically legal. My mother had been my guardian when the money was accessed. Proving that she'd stolen it rather than used it for my benefit would require extensive documentation and years of legal battles I couldn't afford. The lawyer suggested I focus on moving forward rather than backward. But I couldn't move forward. My college dreams depended on financial aid I no longer qualified for, because on paper, my family had substantial income. Scholarships were out of reach because my sabotaged grades had eliminated my competitiveness. I was trapped in a financial cage with no way out. I had no resources, no savings, no ability to leave even if ID had somewhere to go. My mother issued an ultimatum over dinner that week. If I wanted any help with college, any financial support, any path forward, I needed to fix my attitude. I needed to stop making accusations against Ethan, stop blaming others for my problems, and start taking responsibility. The emotional manipulation was suffocating. After everything they'd done to me, they wanted gratitude. Richard added his own cold assessment. Perhaps community college was more my speed anyway. Perhaps I wasn't cut out for a traditional 4-year university. Perhaps lowering my expectations would help me be more realistic about my future. I excused myself from the table before they could see me cry. That night, Ethan appeared in my doorway one more time. He leaned against the frame with that same cruel smile and said the words that finally broke something inside me. You're stuck here now, Harper. You have no money, no friends, no credibility. You're going to do exactly what we say, and there's nothing you can do about it. He was right, and we both knew it. I was completely dependent on people who either wanted to control me or destroy me. My mother had committed the ultimate betrayal, stealing my inheritance and justifying it as her due. And there was nothing I could do except watch my future disappear, while Ethan orchestrated my destruction with methodical precision. 1 week before the confrontation that opened this story, Ethan came home for Thanksgiving break. The Mitchell family had reservations at the country club for a formal dinner, the kind of event where appearances mattered more than anything else. I was warned extensively about my behavior. My mother pulled me aside that afternoon and told me in no uncertain terms that I needed to smile, be polite, and not embarrass the family. Richard added that this dinner was important for his business relationships, that several of his colleagues would be present, and that my recent reputation for causing problems needed to stay outside the country club doors. I agreed numbly. I'd learned that resistance only made things worse. If I could just survive this dinner, it'd be one day closer to graduation, one day closer to aging out of their control. The restaurant was elegant, with white tablecloths, crystal glasses, and soft piano music playing in the background. We were seated at a prominent table where Richard could see and be seen by other club members. The dinner started normally enough. Richard talked business with the man at the next table. My mother smiled and played the role of gracious wife. Ethan was charming as always, making everyone laugh with stories from Yale. I pushed food around my plate and tried to be invisible. Halfway through the meal, I excused myself to use the restroom. The ladies' room was down a long hallway away from the main dining area, past the coat check and the service corridors, where staff moved efficiently out of sight. I was washing my hands when I heard the bathroom door open and close behind me. I glanced up at the mirror and saw Ethan's reflection. My stomach dropped. He shouldn't be in the woman's restroom. I turned to face him, asking what he was doing. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked toward me slowly, backing me against the marble sink counter. His expression held no warmth, no fake concern, just cold calculation. He told me we needed to have a conversation about my attitude. He said it'd been making things difficult for everyone, that my refusal to accept my place in the family was causing unnecessary tension. His voice was low and threatening in a way it never was when others could hear. I tried to step around him, but Ethan moved to block my path. That's when he grabbed my arm, his fingers digging in hard enough to leave marks. He pushed me back against the wall, his other hand flat against the wallpaper next to my head, trapping me. His face was inches from mine. "You're going to stop fighting this," he said quietly. "You're going to accept that you lost, that I won, and that this is your life now." I felt panic rising in my chest. That primal fear that comes when you realize you're in real danger. I told him to let go. He didn't. Instead, he pressed closer, his body pinning me against the wall. His threat was explicit and terrifying. He said if I didn't start cooperating, if I didn't apologize for all the trouble it caused and fall in line, he'd make sure my life became even more unbearable. He'd make sure I never escaped this family. Something inside me snapped. All the fear, all the months of being victimized, all the carefully controlled compliance exploded into action. I shoved Ethan as hard as I could, using all my strength to push him away from me. He stumbled backward, genuinely surprised, but I wasn't done. When he tried to grab for me again, I fought back for real. My nails raked across his face, leaving deep scratches from his temple to his jaw. He shouted in pain and shock. I'd never physically fought back before. I'd taken everything he'd done with nothing more than verbal protests. This was different. This was me finally refusing to be a victim, finally using force to defend myself. That's when Ethan started screaming. His shout was loud and theatrical, designed to bring people running, and it worked. Within seconds, restaurant staff burst through the door. Behind them came my mother and Richard, their faces pale with shock. The scene they encountered was damning. Ethan stood with blood streaming down his face from the scratches, his shirt torn at the collar. I stood pressed against the wall, my own sleeve ripped where Head grabbed me, breathing hard with adrenaline. But no one saw what led to this moment. No one had witnessed Ethan cornering me, threatening me, assaulting me first. They only saw the aftermath, and the aftermath looked like I'd violently attacked my stepbrother without provocation. Ethan's performance was Oscar-worthy. He claimed, with just the right amount of shock and hurt in his voice, that Head simply followed me to the hallway to ask if I was okay because I'd seemed upset at dinner. He said I'd turned on him suddenly, screaming accusations and attacking him with my nails. He said he didn't know what was wrong with me, that Head only been trying to help, that Head never seen me this violent before. The witnesses, the staff members who'd responded to his scream, nodded along. One waiter confirmed that Head heard shouting and arrived to see me standing over Ethan aggressively. My mother's face was a mask of horror. She kept asking over and over what had happened, what had done, why it attacked Ethan. Richard physically pulled me away from his son, his grip on my shoulders painful. His fury was barely controlled as he demanded to know what was wrong with me. The restaurant manager appeared, expressing concern and suggesting they might need to call the police given the violent nature of the incident. Richard made a quick decision. "No police," he said firmly. This was a family matter. They would handle it privately. He apologized profusely for the disturbance, slipped the manager what I assumed was a significant amount of money, and ushered our family toward the exit. The ride home was silent, except for my mother's quiet crying in the front seat. I tried several times to explain what had really happened, that Ethan had cornered me, that Head grabbed me first, that I'd only defended myself. My words fell on deaf ears. "Why would we believe you?" Richard finally said coldly. "You've been lying about Ethan for 2 years. You've made false accusations, destroyed your own reputation, blamed everyone else for your problems. Why on earth would we believe that Ethan attacked you when everyone at that restaurant saw you attacking him?" At home, we had what Richard called a family meeting. Catherine cried throughout, asking where she'd gone wrong, wondering how her daughter had become violent. Richard sat stone-faced with barely controlled rage. Ethan played the wounded victim perfectly, holding ice to his scratched face, occasionally wincing as if in pain. I tried to present my side of the story, but every word sounded desperate and hollow against the weight of their judgment. Then Ethan produced his final piece of evidence. He showed them text messages on his phone, threatening messages that had allegedly been sent from my confiscated cell phone over the past few months. Messages where I supposedly threatened to hurt him, where I expressed hatred for the family, where I detailed violent fantasies. I'd never sent those messages. I didn't even have access to my phone. But the messages existed, complete with timestamps and my phone number. And they painted a picture of someone unstable and dangerous. I broke. I started screaming that they were all crazy, that Ethan was manipulating everyone, that they were blind and stupid for not seeing what he was doing. My outburst only confirmed their worst beliefs about my mental state. Richard made his pronouncement. I was suspended from school effective immediately. I would not return until I apologized to Ethan for the attack and agreed to undergo a full psychiatric evaluation at a facility of his choosing. Catherine nodded tearfully in agreement. This was for my own good, she said. They were trying to help me before I hurt someone or myself. I was escorted to my room. My phone was confiscated, my laptop removed, my door monitored to ensure I didn't try to leave. I was a prisoner in my own home, branded as violent and unstable, with my entire family convinced I was the problem. That night was the darkest of my life. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of complete defeat pressing down on me. Ethan had won. Had successfully painted me as dangerous, given my family justification to lock me away, destroyed any remaining credibility I might have had. I thought about giving up, about just apologizing for things I didn't do, about becoming whatever broken version of myself they wanted. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and despair, a spark of defiance remained. A voice whispered that Ethan had made one critical mistake. Had pushed too far, trapped me too completely, and left me with nothing left to lose. People with nothing to lose become dangerous in ways manipulators don't anticipate. As I drifted toward sleep, a plan began forming. They wanted to destroy me completely? Fine. But I was going to take them down with me. They had no idea what I was really capable of. On the first day of my house arrest, I woke up to an empty house. My mother had gone to work, unable to take more time off after the drama of the previous night. Richard was at his office, probably relieved to escape the chaos of his home life. Ethan had returned to Yale that morning, his scratched face and victim status ensuring maximum sympathy from everyone. I was alone, locked in my room, with nothing but time and rage. But they'd made one critical oversight. Years ago, before the Mitchell family entered my life, I'd hidden an old laptop under a loose floorboard in my closet. It was a backup device my mom had forgotten about when she'd upgraded my computer, something I'd kept secret out of pure instinct. I pried up that floorboard now and pulled out the dusty laptop, praying the battery still held some charge. The laptop powered on. I immediately faced a problem though. No internet access since they'd changed the Wi-Fi password. But our neighbor, Mrs. Doris Whitmore, an elderly widow who lived alone in the house next door, had always been kind to me. Back when I used to help her with grocery bags and yard work, she'd mentioned her Wi-Fi password in passing. I connected to her network and suddenly had access to the outside world again. My hands shook as I opened a new browser window. This was my chance, maybe my only chance, to fight back with something more powerful than desperate protests. I needed evidence, documentation, irrefutable proof that would make it impossible for anyone to dismiss my claims as lies or delusions. I started with a comprehensive timeline, documenting every incident with precise dates, times, and witnesses. The diary theft on March 15th, presented in therapy on March 17th. The homework that disappeared every Tuesday and Thursday for 6 weeks starting in September, coinciding perfectly with Ethan's visits home from Yale. The laptop crash on October 20th, exactly 1 day before major college application deadlines. The appearance of manipulated photos on October 31st, 3 days after Ethan had asked to borrow my phone charger and had my phone in his possession for 2 hours. Pattern after pattern emerged when everything was laid out chronologically. This wasn't random bad luck or my own failures. This was systematic, planned, methodical destruction. Next, I accessed my cloud storage accounts that no one knew existed. I'd backed up my college essays before the crash, storing them in a free email account I'd created years ago. Those pristine, completed essays proved I'd done the work, that my academic decline wasn't laziness or substance abuse. I found screenshots I'd taken of my school portal, showing my grades before they mysteriously changed. I recovered deleted files showing original communications with colleges where ID correctly noted application deadlines before they were somehow altered in my planner. I gathered bank records showing the suspicious transfer of my trust fund money, highlighting the date that fell suspiciously close to conversations where Eid mentioned my 18th birthday plans. Every piece of evidence was copied, organized, and stored in multiple secure locations. Then I received an unexpected lifeline. An email appeared in my inbox from my school counselor, Mrs. Patterson. The subject line read simply, "Are you okay?" The message expressed concern about my suspension, noted that the circumstances seemed unusual, and offered her personal email if I needed someone to talk to. Mrs. Patterson had always been perceptive, more attuned to student needs than most adults in my life. I wrote back immediately, pouring out the entire story in a detailed message that took me 2 hours to compose. I explained Ethan's manipulation, my family's blindness, the systematic destruction of my life. I attached the evidence it gathered. Then I hit send and waited, terrified that she'd dismiss me like everyone else had. Her response came within hours and it changed everything, Mrs. Patterson believed me. She'd seen cases like this before, she wrote, situations where charismatic manipulators convinced entire families to turn against vulnerable members. She said my story had internal consistency, that my behavior at school before the incidents had never suggested instability, and that the sudden decline had always seemed suspicious to her. More importantly, she had access to resources I didn't. As a school counselor, she could request security footage review. She spent that entire day going through archived recordings from school cameras, and what she found was damning. Footage showed Ethan entering the school building on 3 separate occasions when homework assignments of mine went missing. He'd signed in as a visitor, claiming he was there to drop something off for his stepsister, and school security had waved him through because he was Richard Mitchell's son, Mrs. Patterson saved those files and sent them to me encrypted. The second ally appeared through email that same evening. Tyler Brooks had been doing his own investigation after our breakup. Something about the photos had bothered him, technical details that didn't quite match up. He'd shown them to his cousin who studied digital forensics at a technical college. His cousin had analyzed the images and confirmed they were sophisticated Photoshop jobs, complete with evidence of manipulation layers and inconsistent lighting that proved they were composite images. Tyler sent me a detailed report from his cousin, along with a heartfelt apology. "He should have trusted me," he wrote. "He should have questioned the evidence more carefully, instead of assuming the worst. He wanted to help in any way he could. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. I had people who believed me, who were willing to stand up for me, who saw through Ethan's lies." I expanded my investigation beyond my own experiences. Using social media search techniques and Yale University directories, I tracked down Ethan's ex-girlfriend from his freshman year. Her name was Madison Porter, and she'd transferred from Yale to a different university last spring, under circumstances no one talked about publicly. I sent her a carefully worded message explaining who I was and what had happened to me, asking if she'd experienced anything similar. Her response came 2 days later, and reading it felt like looking into a mirror. Madison's story was nearly identical to mine. Ethan had pursued her romantically, she'd rejected him politely, and had systematically destroyed her reputation at Yale. Had spread rumors about her mental stability, created evidence of academic dishonesty that got her placed on probation, isolated her from her friend group through manufactured conflicts. Madison had transferred schools to escape him, but the experience had left her traumatized and furious. She'd documented everything, kept evidence, but her family had pressured her to let it go rather than make waves against the prominent Mitchell family. Now, learning that Ethan had continued his pattern with his own stepsister, Madison was ready to speak up. She sent me her entire documentation file and offered to provide testimony. I spent 4 days compiling everything into a comprehensive presentation: security footage, Photoshop analysis reports, testimony from Madison, my recovered academic work, bank records, timeline documentation showing the correlation between Ethan's presence and incidents targeting me, screenshots of his social media posts that contradicted his alibis. It was irrefutable. It was damning. And I had multiple backup copies stored in cloud drives, sent to Mrs. Patterson and Tyler for safekeeping, burned onto old flash drives hidden in my room. My mother came home early one afternoon and nearly caught me working on the laptop. I barely had time to hide it back under the floorboard before she knocked on my door. She stood in my doorway with this exhausted expression and asked if I was ready to apologize yet, if I understood that this was all for my own good. I looked at her and lied for the first time in this whole nightmare. I told her I was thinking about it, that maybe it'd been wrong about everything, that I just needed a little more time. The relief on her face was painful to see. She actually believed I was breaking, that Ethan's trap was working perfectly. She had no idea that in a few days, I was going to detonate a truth bomb that would destroy the perfect Mitchell family illusion forever. Thanksgiving Day arrived 5 days into my house arrest. The Mitchell household buzzed with preparation for extended family dinner. My mother spent the morning cooking while Richard barked orders about table settings and wine selections. I played my role perfectly, offering to help with food preparation, smiling when appropriate, pretending to be the contrite daughter finally accepting her punishment. Richard commented to Catherine that the time in my room seemed to be having a positive effect, that perhaps I was finally maturing. My mother smiled hopefully, so desperate to believe her family was healing. I chopped vegetables and felt no guilt about what I was going to do to them. They'd earned every second of the humiliation that was coming. Extended family started arriving around 2 in the afternoon. Catherine's sister, Aunt Diane, came with her husband and teenage kids. Richard's brother Malcolm arrived with his wife Ruth, both of them dressed formally as always. Richard's mother, grandmother Phyllis, swept in wearing pearls and carrying an expensive bottle of wine. Various cousins and second cousins filled the house with noise and activity. The family gathering was exactly the kind of event Richard loved, where he could show off his beautiful home and successful blended family. I greeted everyone politely, accepted hugs from relatives who whispered that they'd heard I'd been going through a tough time. They had no idea how tough, or who'd, caused it. Around 3:30, Ethan arrived from Yale, had driven home for Thanksgiving as planned, and his entrance was everything I'd expected. He hugged Richard, kissed my mother's cheek, charmed grandmother Phyllis with compliments about her dress, and carefully kept the scratched side of his face positioned so everyone could see it. Dinner was scheduled for 4 o'clock. We all gathered in the formal dining room with its long mahogany table set with Richard's expensive china. The scene looked like something from a magazine spread about successful American families. Rich food, beautiful decorations, smiling people in their best clothes. Richard sat at the head of the table with Catherine beside him, the perfect couple. Ethan sat near his father, basking in attention. I'd been seated near the far end, positioned almost like an afterthought. Aunt Diane kept giving me concerned looks. She'd always been more perceptive than most of my relatives, and I think she sensed something was wrong with how isolated I seemed. As people passed dishes and poured wine, conversation flowed easily. Malcolm asked Ethan about Yale. Grandmother Phyllis complimented Catherine's cooking. Everything was perfect and civilized and completely fake. Halfway through the main course, I asked if I could make an announcement. The table went quiet. Richard looked surprised but pleased, probably assuming this was the moment of my apology. Catherine's face lit up with hope. I stood carefully, walked to the corner of the room where I'd hidden my laptop behind the decorative curtains earlier that morning, and returned to the table with it open. Richard asked what I was doing. I told him I had something important to show everyone, something that would explain everything that had been happening in this family. My mother asked if this could wait until after dinner. I said no, it couldn't, that everyone needed to see this right now. The confusion in the room was palpable, but I also saw curiosity. Ethan's face had gone carefully blank, his manipulator's instinct probably warning him that something was wrong. I connected my laptop to the large television mounted on the dining room wall. Richard used that TV for presentations when he entertained business clients. Now it was going to serve a very different purpose. The screen flickered to life, showing my carefully prepared presentation. I started with the timeline, dates, and incidents displayed in clear text. As I clicked through slides, security footage began playing. The first video showed Ethan entering my school building on a Tuesday morning when my homework had disappeared. The timestamp was clear. The image quality was good enough to identify him definitely. I explained calmly what each piece of evidence showed, keeping my voice steady and factual. This wasn't an emotional outburst. This was a prosecution. The next slides showed the Photoshop analysis of the photos that had destroyed my reputation. Tyler's cousin had created a comprehensive report breaking down exactly how the images had been manipulated, highlighting inconsistent shadows and impossible angles that proved they were fake. I showed the original files recovered from Ethan's computer, files that Mrs. Patterson had helped me access through his old-school login that had never been deactivated. There they were. Photoshop project files, with layers showing how Head constructed fake images by combining my photos with stock images and other people. The room was dead silent now. People had stopped eating. Aunt Diane's hand covered her mouth. Malcolm leaned forward, staring at the screen intently. I continued methodically. Bank records showing my mother's theft of my trust fund with timeline notation showing this occurred right after Ed mentioned using the money to move out. Screenshots of text messages showing metadata that proved the threatening messages allegedly from my phone had actually been sent from a device registered to Ethan Mitchell. The email exchanges between Ethan and his friend from Yale, where he literally bragged about the Harper project, describing in casual terms how he was systematically destroying his stepsister's life. The friend had asked why, and Ethan's response was chilling. Because she rejected me, and no one rejects me without consequences. Reading those words aloud into the stunned silence of the dining room, I watched Ethan's face lose all color. Then came Madison Porter's video testimony. Id asked her to record a statement describing her experience with Ethan. She spoke for 5 minutes detailing how Head pursued her romantically, how Shed turned him down politely, and how Head subsequently destroyed her academic career and reputation at Yale through calculated manipulation. She showed documentation proving her claims, including emails from Yale administration discussing the mysterious circumstances of her academic probation. She explained that she was coming forward now because she couldn't let Ethan continue hurting people, that she wished she'd been brave enough to speak up before he moved on to his next victim. Her testimony was powerful and credible, and it established a pattern of behavior that made my story impossible to dismiss. The final piece of evidence was audio recording. I'd hidden my phone in the living room weeks ago, long before it had been confiscated, tucked behind some books where no one thought to look. It had recorded a conversation between Ethan and his friend when they'd thought the house was empty. On the recording, Ethan described his manipulation tactics in detail, laughing about how easy it was to turn my family against me, joking about how gullible Richard and Catherine were. He talked about the diary theft, the academic sabotage, the fake photos. He explained his motivations with casual cruelty. Harper thought she was too good for this family, he said on the tape. She needed to learn her place. I was just teaching her that she's nothing without us, that no one will ever believe her over me. The audio was clear, undeniable, and devastating. When the presentation ended and the TV screen went dark, the silence in the room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Aunt Diane was crying quietly. Grandmother Phyllis looked pale and shocked. Malcolm's face was red with fury, but directed at his nephew, not at me. Richard sat frozen, his perfect dinner party destroyed. Catherine looked like she'd been physically struck, her hand pressed against her chest, tears streaming down her face. Ethan tried to speak, started to say that Id fabricated everything, that this was all fake. But Tyler stepped out from where He'd been waiting in the kitchen. Id asked him to come as a witness, to record everything on his phone, to be physical proof that I wasn't alone anymore. His presence shocked everyone further. Mrs. Patterson arrived at that moment, having been invited as my witness and advocate. She introduced herself as my school counselor and confirmed that she'd reviewed all the evidence independently and found it credible and concerning. Richard finally found his voice. It came out strangled and harsh as he turned to Ethan and demanded to know what the meaning of this was. Ethan's carefully constructed image began crumbling. He tried several different tactics, rapid fire. Denial, claiming Id manufactured everything. Blame, saying Id made him do it by being difficult. Victimization, suggesting He'd only been trying to help and Id misunderstood. But each attempt fell flat against the weight of evidence. Malcolm, Richard's brother, cut through Ethan's excuses with cold precision. Richard, your son has been methodically abusing his stepsister and manipulating your entire family. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is documented predatory behavior. The words hung in the air like an indictment. Catherine tried to speak to me, reaching out with trembling hands, saying my name over and over like a prayer. The horror of realization was written across her face. She'd betrayed her own daughter, stolen from me, sided with my abuser, and the evidence of her failure as a mother was displayed on a TV screen for the entire family to witness. I looked at her and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. I told her I wanted emancipation proceedings started immediately. I wanted my trust fund money returned with interest and damages. I wanted acknowledgement in writing from both her and Richard of what had been done to me. Aunt Diane immediately said I could stay with her family. Grandmother Phyllis announced she'd pay for lawyers, her voice shaking with anger at what her grandson had done. The extended family turned on Richard and Catherine with questions and accusations. How could you not see this? How could you let this happen to Harper? What kind of parents are you? Richard's authority in his own home collapsed. The successful businessman who controlled everything suddenly had no control at all. He tried to restore order, to suggest we discuss this privately, but Malcolm pulled out his phone and called the police. Assault charges needed to be filed, he said firmly. This had gone beyond family discipline into criminal behavior. Ethan panicked then, really panicked. He tried to leave, pushing back from the table. Tyler moved to block the doorway. Ethan's final manipulation attempt was to turn to his father and beg for help, to plead that this was all a misunderstanding. But Richard just stared at his son like he was seeing him for the first time, seeing past the golden boy image to the manipulator underneath. I stood at the head of the table, my laptop still open, surrounded by family members who finally understood the truth. I looked at Ethan directly and delivered my final statement. You wanted an apology from me? Hair is mine. I'm sorry I didn't expose you sooner. I'm sorry I let you hurt me for 2 years before I fought back. But I'm not sorry for this, for destroying your perfect image and showing everyone what you really are. The room erupted in voices again, but I was done. I'd said everything I needed to say. The truth was out. The evidence was documented. And for the first time since Richard Mitchell had entered my life, I had witnesses and allies and proof. They couldn't gaslight me anymore. They couldn't make me doubt my reality. I'd survived, I'd fought back, and I'd won. 3 months passed between that Thanksgiving dinner and the day I finally felt like I could breathe again. The legal proceedings moved quickly, once everything came to light. Emancipation was granted by a judge who reviewed the evidence and stated plainly that I'd been failed by the adults responsible for my protection. The court ordered Catherine to return my trust fund in full, plus damages for emotional distress and financial losses. The final amount was $75,000, more than enough to fund my education and start my independent life. Criminal charges were filed against Ethan for harassment, fraud, and assault. Yale suspended him pending their own investigation. His golden boy future crumbled as thoroughly as Head tried to crumble mine. Richard and Catherine's marriage didn't survive the aftermath. Richard filed for divorce within a month, unable to reconcile with the fact that his wife had stolen from her own daughter and enabled his son's abuse. Catherine moved into a small apartment across town, her comfortable life in the Mitchell mansion ending abruptly. I didn't feel much sympathy for either of them. They'd made their choices, and now they were living with consequences. I moved in with Aunt Diane and her family, experiencing for the first time what a healthy household actually felt like. They gave me space when I needed it, support when I asked for it, and unconditional love without manipulation. Aunt Diane's teenage kids welcomed me like a sister. Her husband treated me with respect and kindness. It was strange at first, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for some hidden cruelty to emerge. But it never did. This was what normal families looked like. I started therapy with a new counselor, Dr. Chen, who specialized in family trauma and narcissistic abuse. The sessions were hard. Processing 2 years of systematic manipulation and betrayal wasn't something I could rush through. Dr. Chen helped me understand that what Ethan had done was a form of psychological warfare, that my responses had been normal reactions to abnormal circumstances, that I wasn't crazy or difficult or any of the things it'd been labeled. We worked on rebuilding my sense of self-worth, establishing healthy boundaries, learning to trust my own perceptions again. Some days were harder than others. Some days I still heard Ethan's voice in my head telling me no one would believe me. But those voices grew quieter with time and work. Brianna reached out to me in January with a tearful apology. She'd heard about everything that happened, seen the evidence that had been shared with the school administration. She felt horrible for believing the manufactured text messages, for abandoning me when I needed her most. We met for coffee and talked for hours. I explained that I didn't blame her, that Ethan's manipulation had been sophisticated and targeted, that she'd been a victim of his schemes too. Rebuilding our friendship took time. Trust doesn't just snap back into place after betrayal, even betrayal that wasn't entirely her fault. But we worked on it slowly, carefully, and eventually found our way back to something that felt genuine. Tyler and I took an even slower approach. We'd both been hurt by what happened. He felt guilty for doubting me. I felt wounded by his lack of faith. We decided to be friends first, to rebuild the foundation before trying to resurrect the relationship. By March, we were cautiously dating again, both of us more aware of how fragile trust could be, both of us committed to better communication. My academic recovery happened faster than I'd expected. The school administration reviewed my entire record in light of the evidence. They corrected grades that had been affected by the sabotage, restored my 4.0 GPA, and wrote letters to colleges explaining the extraordinary circumstances that had impacted my applications. Mrs. Patterson personally advocated for me with admissions offices. By February, it'd been accepted to 3 universities. The full scholarship offer from State University came with a personal note from the admissions director expressing admiration for my resilience and determination. I was going to study psychology with a focus on family trauma. I wanted to help other people who found themselves trapped in situations like mine, wanted to be the advocate I desperately needed. Madison Porter's decision to come forward created ripples beyond my case. 2 other young women from Ethan's time at Yale contacted her after seeing her testimony. They'd also been targeted by him, also manipulated and harmed, but had stayed silent out of fear or shame. Together, they filed formal complaints with Yale's administration. The pattern of behavior was undeniable. Yale expelled Ethan permanently, citing violations of their code of conduct and the safety threat he posed to other students. His reputation in his social circles was destroyed. Friends who'd once admired him now avoided him. The consequences were real and lasting. Ethan was required by the court to undergo psychiatric treatment, to maintain a restraining order preventing any contact with me, and to perform community service. His manipulation tactics were being dissected in mandatory therapy sessions. Whether he'd actually change or just learn to hide his behavior better remained to be seen, but at least he was being held accountable. Catherine's attempts at reconciliation came through weekly emails that arrived like clockwork. She wrote long messages apologizing, explaining how she'd been blinded by her desire to keep her marriage, begging for forgiveness and a chance to rebuild our relationship. I established firm boundaries through my lawyer. I was willing to have limited contact, but only after she'd completed substantial therapy herself and demonstrated real understanding of the harm she'd caused. Forgiveness wasn't something she could demand or expect. It was something I might choose to offer eventually, but only on my terms and timeline. Catherine enrolled in therapy and started the difficult work of examining her choices. We exchanged occasional emails, but I maintained emotional distance. She'd been my mother once, but she'd betrayed that role so thoroughly that I wasn't sure it could ever be fully restored. Richard disappeared from my life almost entirely. He moved to a different city for work, probably unable to face the judgment of colleagues and friends who'd learned the truth about his family. I had no interest in maintaining contact with him. The healing journey wasn't linear. Some days I felt strong and vindicated. Other days I felt angry at the time I'd lost, the trauma I'd endured, the childhood and adolescence that had been stolen by Ethan's cruelty and my family's willful blindness. Dr. Chen reminded me that both things could be true simultaneously, that I could be proud of my survival while still grieving what I'd lost. I learned to trust my instincts again, that internal voice that had tried to warn me about Ethan from the beginning. I learned that not all families are safe, that blood relation doesn't obligate you to accept abuse, that sometimes the healthiest choice is to walk away. I learned that there are good people in the world, people like Mrs. Patterson and Tyler and Aunt Diane, who will stand up for you when you can't stand up for yourself. I started volunteering with a local organization that helped teenagers experiencing family abuse and manipulation. I shared my story at support group meetings, watching young faces light up with recognition when I described gaslighting and isolation tactics. So many kids were trapped in situations where adults refused to believe them, where charismatic abusers controlled the narrative. I became the voice telling them they weren't crazy, their perceptions were valid, and there were paths forward even when everything seemed hopeless. The work was hard but meaningful. Every teenager I helped felt like justice for my younger self had no one. By the time I moved into my college dorm room in August, I felt transformed. The scared, isolated 17-year-old who'd have been suspended from school had grown into someone stronger and more certain. My dorm walls were decorated with photos of my real support system: Aunt Diane's family at a barbecue, Brianna and me laughing at graduation, Tyler and me at prom, Mrs. Patterson at my scholarship award ceremony. These were the people who'd proven that family isn't just about blood, it's about who shows up for you, who believes you, who fights beside you. I framed my college acceptance letters on the wall above my desk, tangible proof that Ethan hadn't succeeded in destroying my future. I kept a journal now, not hidden like before, but openly on my bedside table. I documented my healing journey, my victories and setbacks, my growing understanding of narcissistic family dynamics and institutional failures. The life lessons I'd learned were hard-won but valuable. I understood now how easily systems fail vulnerable people, how authority figures can be manipulated, how victim blaming allows abuse to continue. I recognized the signs of narcissistic behavior, the love bombing and devaluation cycles, the triangulation tactics that pit family members against each other. I knew that your voice matters even when people try to silence you, that persistence can eventually break through denial, that documentation and evidence can counteract gaslighting. I learned that justice sometimes takes time, but is worth fighting for, that healing is possible after even the deepest betrayals, and that you don't owe forgiveness to people who've harmed you just because they're family. The most important lesson was about freedom. Real freedom isn't just physical independence. It's the freedom to trust yourself, to set boundaries, to say no, to walk away from toxicity without guilt. For 2 years, I'd been trapped in a prison made of manipulation, false accusations, and family loyalty twisted into a weapon. They'd tried to break me, to suspend my life until I submitted to their control and apologized for things I hadn't done. Instead, I'd suspended my relationship with them until they faced the truth. I'd reclaimed my story, my future, and my power. As I sat at my desk in that dorm room, starting my first college assignments in psychology, I thought about how far I'd traveled from that moment in the living room when my mother told me I couldn't return to school. Shed meant it as punishment. I'd turned it into liberation. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a situation where family members refused to believe you? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments below, because sharing these experiences helps others feel less alone. If this story resonated with you, if you've learned anything about standing up for yourself or recognizing manipulation, please hit that like button. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss stories about resilience and survival. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that they're not crazy, that their truth matters, that there's hope even in the darkest situations. I read every single comment, and your support means everything, not just to me, but to everyone who's lived through similar experiences. Thank you for listening to my story, for believing in the power of truth, and for being part of a community that refuses to let victims be silenced. I hope you find your own strength, set your own boundaries, and never apologize for protecting yourself from people who try to destroy you. Stay strong, stay true to yourself, and remember that you deserve better than what abusers offer. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.